Laura climbed into her old twin bed and instantly fell asleep. The wedding preparations had been so exhausting that she could hardly cope. Tonight she hoped to drift off quickly, knowing it might be her last night in her childhood room. After the wedding, she and her beloved Ethan would move into the condo they bought last year, but had left vacant. Laura didn't want to stay there alone. She had been smitten with Ethan since high school. You are. He was the kindest, most caring, and undoubtedly the love of her life. Her friend Emily was singing Ethan's praises to Sarah, who was blunt and called Emily naive for not looking closer at him. He's lazy and lacks ambition, but he's smart. Why do you think he suddenly noticed you? I bet it's only because your dad is a successful entrepreneur. That's not true. He loves me, Laura defended Ethan. While Emily urged, come on, Sarah, admit it. He's so thoughtful, always bringing you flowers and all those quirky, inexpensive gifts, Sarah responded sarcastically. Sarah sided with Laura, saying, you're wrong, Sarah. It's not the price of the gift, but the thought that counts. And then Laura remembered how her grandmother used to call her naive, saying she couldn't see the big picture, choosing the least dependable man. Your teacher, Mrs. Robinson, told me he's clueless and lazy. He'll just drag you down. Recently, Laura overheard two neighbors gossiping about how silly she was, complaining that Ethan still didn't have a job and was unreliable. All the negative chatter about Ethan seemed to converge today, Laura thought resentfully. And then she drifted off. In her dream, she was on shifting ground starting to sink. Invisible wings fluttered, and voices whispered, calling her naive, seeking her downfall, urging her to wake up. People standing among barren, gnarled trees shouted at her, and waking up, Laura was relieved it was just a dream. Weird, even in dreams they call me naive. Maybe I am indeed rushing this wedding. Oh well, it's too late now, everything's settled. No turning back, but I'm overjoyed. I love Ethan, and everything else is trivial. And she fell asleep again. In the morning, the dream troubled her, and she confided in her grandmother, who tried to caution her against making a mistake. You're really plunging into it, straight into a mess, her grandmother remarked, calling her naive again. Laura wept, but her grandmother reassured her. You still have 2 days to think it over. Maybe there's no need to rush. What are you talking about, Grandma? Ethan and I are set, Laura said confidently, though a seed of doubt lingered. She spent the day in a daze, packing her things to move them to the new condo before the wedding. She had hardly seen Ethan lately, and today, after lunch, she called him again, hoping to invite him to the lake. Summer was almost over, and she hadn't visited much this year, but Ethan didn't respond, not even the next morning. Deciding he must be busy, she went to the lake alone. Their neighborhood was new, designed so a lake and a small park were nearby, and a new road had just been finished, leading to downtown where their college was. Laura walked to the lake, her spirits inexplicably high despite everyone calling her naive the day before. All the joggers who visited the lake each morning had already finished their routines and left. Alone, Laura cautiously stepped onto the beach and approached the water. Oh, it's chilly, she murmured, then suddenly heard some rustling behind the bushes. Last year, she and a neighborhood kid had rescued a dog caught in some discarded fishing nets here. Bravely parting the branches, she was shocked to find Ethan and Emily intimately entangled. Upon seeing Laura, Emily shamelessly snuggled closer to Ethan, as if to block Laura's view of something she supposedly didn't need to see. Feeling betrayed, Laura spun around and dashed back home, realizing she needed someone to vent to, someone to cry with, someone to console her. She first thought of Sarah, but hesitated, fearing Sarah might not want to share her embarrassment. Weeping, Laura ran to her grandmother, who was sitting at the entrance with two neighbors. Laura paused, gathered herself, and then her grandmother noticed her distress, stood up, and rushed over, allowing Laura to let her tears flow freely. The neighbors, sensing they were intruding, went inside, leaving the grandmother to escort Laura home. At home, after sobbing again, Laura, her face flushed with shame, confided in her grandmother about what she had witnessed. It's all over before it even started, she felt relieved, but now everyone will laugh at me. In Laura's voice was fear, but her grandmother reassured her. Let them. At least you can be proud of yourself. What's there to be proud of, that I'm naive, that I was deceived and humiliated? No, that you were able to rise above pettiness and vulgarity and leave it all behind. Or were you thinking of forgiving him? What are you talking about, Grandma? How can you forgive something like that? Laura exclaimed indignantly. Things happen, Laura, but in your case you can't overlook such blatant deceit. It's quite possible others saw them too, not just you. Sarah, true to her character, couldn't tell Laura either because she didn't want the wedding to happen and had sought her own grandmother's advice that day. No, granddaughter, her grandmother said in response to Sarah's story. Your friend must see for herself. Your words will just seem like jealousy and will only lead to a permanent rift between you. But I feel sorry for Laura, Sarah lamented. You know pity humiliates a person. She wouldn't want to be humiliated by two friends. And when she marries him, it will be too late to even feel sorry for her. He will ruin her life. No, he won't. When the rose-colored glasses come off, she'll realize her mistake. And when she does, she'll correct it. She's a smart girl. For now, don't rush her. Everything has its time. I advise you, my granddaughter, not to rush into marriage until you're sure you're in love, or you'll end up like Laura, unable to properly evaluate his true character under the spell of love. Sarah decided to heed her grandmother's advice and thought she'd remain silent for now. When Laura got home, Sarah was already waiting for her at the condo door. If Sarah hadn't known her, she might have thought Laura had been drinking all day. Her friend's nose was red, her hair was simply tied back in a ponytail, and her eyes were filled with utter despair. The wedding's off, she declared at the doorstep. Thank goodness, thought Sarah, and hugged her. Without any further explanation, Laura asked about the guests. What about them now? They're friends of both ours and his. Without waiting for a response, Sarah immediately offered, Do you want me to call all your guests and let them know? But I think you should talk to your parents first, she added cautiously. No need. Mom's at home crying, and Dad's disappeared. I'm worried about him. He isn't even at Grandma's, said Laura. Did they support you? Sarah asked tentatively, fearing Laura might guess that she knew the reason for calling off the wedding, but Laura didn't even notice the question. Yes, they supported me. Mom even said that everything happens for the best. Laura stated firmly but burst into tears again. Then give me the phones, and I'll make the calls. You'll just end up crying after each one. I'll go look for your dad. I'm worried about him. He handled all the planning, and I didn't get involved. Now I need all the numbers to cancel the photographer, the officiant, the venue, and everything else. All the contacts are only with him. Wait, said Sarah. Mike, help out. Be a friend, she shouted to her brother, who had just come home. Hey, Laura, do you need help finding him? Yes, she needs to find her dad. I can do that quickly. What should I tell him? Tell him that we can't manage without him and bring him to us. Will he come with me? The 13-year-old Mike wondered. He will, his sister assured confidently. Knowing to look for Mr. Thompson in the garage, Mike brought him back in 10 minutes. Together with Sarah, they canceled everything that could be canceled, while Laura sat beside them, not even hearing what Sarah was discussing with her father. Only when her friend said, "Snap out of it," did she come to her senses. Sarah was curious to see what Ethan would do the next day, so she dressed as if for the wedding and approached the entrance of Laura's condo at the already canceled time. A few minutes later, she saw a car pull up. Ethan and a friend emerged, whom Sarah had met a week ago, and wondered why they hadn't opened the door. They waited a bit, and after a boy ran out of the entrance, they went inside where Laura lived, but the condo was locked. Sarah boldly rang the bell, knowing the place was empty. She saw the groom's face stretch when he finally realized there would be no wedding. Whether it was from surprise or relief, Sarah didn't know. They left her at the entrance, got into the car, and drove away. As Sarah walked home, she wondered whether someone had told Laura about the infidelity or if she had found out herself. The neighborhood ladies on the benches, of course, discussed the reasons for the wedding not happening. But soon, a new piece of news made them forget this completely insignificant event in the lives of the neighborhood's most curious residents. In the neighboring house, in a family that already had a child, twins were born, and everyone immediately forgot about Laura. Soon, college classes began, and Laura and Sarah entered their senior year. On one hand, they were glad, but on the other, they were saddened because they needed to start job hunting early. A common problem for all young graduates, especially after the whole ordeal with her failed engagement. This isn't for me, Laura would periodically tell Sarah. showing her the latest graphic design work on her laptop. She had been involved in graphic design for a year and a half. "You know, Sarah, I thrive in this field. I create, and I absolutely love it. I'll of course finish college, but I feel I won't need my degree. And I'll go into my field," Sarah said dreamily. Winter passed, and spring flew by because they were so focused on their studies, and surprisingly, the wound Ethan had inflicted on Laura healed quickly, although she abruptly stopped going to the lake, which surprised everyone, as she used to walk there even in winter. Well, the girls passed their final exams, and soon after, there was a last push for their thesis defense, and Laura and Sarah became graduates, ready to find jobs. But first, they wanted to rest because it was summer. Laura's father arranged with his brother, who lived near the ocean, for Laura and her friend to stay with them for a couple of weeks. When Uncle Alex agreed, they quickly packed up and headed to the beach. Uncle Alex lived in a large town quite far from the ocean, but buses ran regularly, and they had no problem getting to the beach. The girls spent mornings and until mid-afternoon at the beach, or traveled to the city to see local attractions. Returning, they helped with the household. Uncle had a large garden and vegetable patch where, it seemed, just about every vegetable was planted. The girls happily watered the plants and fought with the weeds. Laura's cousins and their families lived separately, and during their stay at Uncle's, Laura saw them only twice. One watering day, Laura was surprised to see a little girl in the neighbor's yard, though she knew only an elderly woman lived there. Curious, the girl reached out to Laura and said, "Mama, what's your name, little one?" Laura asked her, but the girl remained silent. Then the neighbor herself approached, and the girl greeted her, asking, "And where did you get such a beauty, Aunt Liuba?" "My great-granddaughter Katie just arrived last night with her father. She's just started talking, so besides Mama, Papa, and Uncle, she doesn't know any other words." "What's this mysterious word she wants?" laughed Aunt Liuba, with whom they had become friends and sometimes helped in the garden. "Oh, what a smart little girl," laughed Laura. "They arrived yesterday with her grandson, and there's so much growing in our garden that you could indeed spend the whole day repeating that word." Meanwhile, the light-haired, blue-eyed girl stretched out her hand, and Laura reached back. The girl, grabbing her hand with her two little ones, suddenly began to cry. "Katie, come here, settle down," a man's voice suddenly called out, and the girl saw a man approaching the fence. "Why are you upset? Why are you crying, Katie?" The little girl pointed at Laura, exclaiming, "Mommy! Mommy!" He glanced at Laura, and their eyes met, a connection sparking, and she smiled, saying, "Katie probably wants to visit us. I'll meet you." Laura ran to the gate, opened it, and dashed out into the street. They also came out, the father cradling the girl in his arms. But Katie squirmed free. He set her down, and she immediately ran to Laura and clung to the hem of her dress, repeating, "Mommy, Mommy." Laura lifted the girl, and Katie hugged her neck and then said, "Sing, sing." The man apologized. "Sorry, she mistook you for her mother and wants you to sing her a song from a cartoon, but I don't know any cartoon songs," Laura said, bewildered. "I'll find it right now," said Sarah, and quickly found the song on her phone, and soon a beautiful and tender voice of a singer filled the air. The girl fell silent, but hugged Laura even tighter. They stood like this until the song ended. Aunt Liuba came out and tried to take Katie, but she didn't want to go to her, so the girls had to go inside their house, seating the guests and the granddaughter on the sofa. Aunt Liuba asked to listen to the song once more, calming Katie down, who eventually fell asleep to it, while the girls prepared to leave. "Oh, show me how to find that song. It will give me no peace now," said Aunt Liuba. Sarah showed her but warned her, as a young psychology specialist, that the song would likely only work in conjunction with Laura, whom Katie mistook for her mom. "And we're leaving in 5 days." Sarah was eager to ask where Katie's mom was, but the man, as if reading her thoughts, said, "Her mom is no more." He turned and quickly left the room, unable to reconcile with the loss of his wife. "We had a mom, and then she saw you. You really resemble Yuri's wife," said Laura, embarrassed. She didn't want to be caught up in such a story, and decided not to even approach the fence anymore. They spent the remaining days mostly at the beach, and Laura now only helped in the kitchen. Soon they left home. Laura excitedly told her parents about their vacation, constantly asking why they hadn't gone to the ocean with Uncle Alex. "I really want to live by the ocean. It's so great to see it and swim in it every day, even in winter," Her enthusiasm waned as her father mentioned the very windy and unpleasant weather. "Well, let it be. After such a winter, summer will be sweeter," Laura laughed. Soon Laura got a job at a preschool. While she was away, her mom had found her a job, and Sarah in a counseling center. She quickly fit into the team and enjoyed her work. But Laura initially found it very tough, as instead of working with children, she ended up dealing more with their parents, whose complaints about the preschool staff irritated her and prevented her from doing the work with the children she was supposed to do. Parents always irritated, always thinking they were right. Every time Laura talked to them, she saw Yuri's eyes in which, somewhere deep down, was the pain of irrevocably lost love, the pain of loneliness, and the anxiety for his daughter. As it seemed to her, interacting with the children brought her joy, but the conversations with the parents often sparked such anger that she wanted to just quit the job and dive into the creative process of graphic design. However, she promised her parents that she would work at the preschool for a year and then see. After much reflection, Laura decided that in the coming year, she would definitely finish online design courses, the sooner the better. The holiday season was approaching, and she suddenly wanted to celebrate New Year's at Uncle Alex's and called to ask if she could visit. Her parents were a bit surprised on the way, and here Laura was approaching the familiar gate. It was chilly here, but there was neither snow nor ice, although anything could happen since the weather was a fickle lady, but for now, it was beautiful. The relatives were delighted to see Laura. "Well, hello, niece. Good that you came. We can't rely on our own. Our kids took down the curtains. We with Antonia washed and ironed them, but we can't hang them. They're always busy," Uncle Alex complained immediately, justifying his children who were indeed busy. After feeding the guest, they showed her the ladder, which he could no longer climb higher than the second step. But Laura quickly managed the task and the house instantly felt festive and cozy. Laura had just come down from the ladder when suddenly the front door slammed, and Katie burst into the room in one home dress and slippers, screaming, "Mommy, Mommy, pick me up!" She ran up and Laura's heart stopped. She rushed towards the girl, picked her up, and they hugged tightly, freezing as if listening to the beat of their hearts. Finally, Katie kissed her on the forehead, on the nose, on the chin, just as her grandmother used to kiss her, and she laughed heartily, just as Katie did now. "More, more," Katie repeated and repeated. At home, Baba Liuba hadn't even noticed her absence, and when Laura and Aunt Tony brought her home, she was very surprised and mainly upset because they were sure that Katie had forgotten about her mom and Laura. Katie and Laura simply radiated happiness. It was impossible not to notice. "Liuba, we're waiting for the whole family to celebrate New Year's Eve. It's unlikely Katie will stay at home once she sees the children in our yard, so don't refuse. And you'll get a break from her. Admit it, you're tired." But she just waved her hand. "From you, only one dish for the New Year's table, a salad of carrots and chicken. Almost vegetarian, but very tasty. Remember, it was very tasty at your birthday? Well, mine never turns out as tasty. We of course ate it when I made it following your recipe, but it just wasn't the same. Yours is somehow tastier." Just then, George returned from work. He expected his daughter to greet him as usual, but hearing strangers' voices, he realized they had guests. Entering the room, he immediately saw Katie and Laura hugging, and his expression darkened. "And I brought a gift, Princess," he said, trying to sound cheerful. Katie slid from Laura's arms and ran after him. Laura followed them into the hallway where a small Christmas tree stood. Katie reached out, pricked her finger, EUR, it was hardly painful, EUR, but unexpectedly, she looked at Laura, then at her father, but ran to cry to her grandmother. George and Laura looked at each other bewildered, each very much wanting to continue that gaze. "Why did you hurt her?" Entering the hallway with the granddaughter in arms, said the grandmother. "It was her Christmas tree that pricked her. We had nothing to do with it," George said cheerfully. Laura suddenly felt that in just a minute, his attitude towards her had changed, and he was glad she came. Aunt Tony went home, and Laura stayed. The three of them together decorated the tree, pulling out ornaments from the box, mostly old ones bought by Grandma Liuba's parents. Then they turned on Katie's favorite cartoon with that beloved song and waited for her to fall asleep. Only after that did Laura go to her relatives. It took her about 3 minutes to walk there, but during that time, she imagined that they lived in her apartment in that village, and she and George were together. The picture was so vivid that Laura blushed and squinted, then quietly laughed. New Year's was celebrated grandly. Uncle Alex and Aunt Tony's children from the city with their kids celebrated both inside the house and in the yard where they grilled barbecue almost until morning because it was very warm. The adults had fun with the children, forgetting they had long grown up, and everyone tried to take a picture by the Christmas tree growing right in the yard, planted on the birthday of the oldest grandchild, and still not too tall. After midnight, all the neighbors with children and all the families in turn came into Uncle Alex's yard and took turns taking pictures by the Christmas tree. They too took a group photo, asking a neighborhood boy to somehow fit them all in the frame. When everyone had left, Laura asked the boy to take a picture of her with Katie. Laura felt herself the happiest on this first New Year's night, not at all like when she was about to get married, because back then, she thought only of herself. Now she wanted everyone around her to be happy, especially those two who had become so close and dear, Katie and her dad. And suddenly, she desperately wanted to stay here near the ocean. The holidays ended, and it was time for Laura to leave. "Laura, maybe you should move in with us. Otherwise, Katie will again become silent like last time. Think about it, but at least tell your granddaughter you'll return." "I will return, I definitely will," she told Grandma Liuba, and invited Katie and George to visit her, better in spring or summer. "I don't invite in winter," she concluded. When Laura returned home, she immediately announced to her parents that she was moving to live alone in an apartment, which she rented. Her father and mother did not try to dissuade her, considering that she was an adult and entitled to do as she pleased. Her grandmother approved of her decision, saying as a piece of advice, "Laura, your destiny is in your own hands. Don't let them get lazy, neither at home nor at work, and then everything will be good for you." She began to call George and Katie more often, talking to both for a long time. By summer, Katie was already speaking well, using her grandmother's lexicon from their conversations. Laura guessed that she spent all day only with her grandmother. The grandmother said she would go to the market, but went to the store instead, and forgot that they had run out of sugar, bringing back the wrong item. "You can't trust her, clearly," Katie told Laura, but she hesitated to talk to George when Katie was around. However, one day, when he informed her that he was going on vacation and didn't know where to take Katie, he was alone, and Laura reminded him that she had been waiting for them to visit. A few days later, he called again and informed her that they had bought tickets to her city and provided the train number and car. She suddenly heard him whisper, somewhat shyly, "I've missed you." Laura was swept with excitement, suddenly realizing that she too had been longing. "I wonder if I've matured or just gotten wiser. Maybe both. My love for Ethan was some kind of folly, like a forbidden fruit. If everyone had kept quiet and not told me he was not right for me, I might not have even looked his way when he started to court me seriously. I was in a rush back then and wanted to do everything my way. Grandma was right. One shouldn't make hasty decisions. After all, I hardly knew Ethan. Yes, we went to the same school, but we never talked, and he only showed his handsome face, hiding what was behind his soul, which I neither saw nor maybe wanted to see. How good that fate showed me a hint that it was time to get wiser. Have I gotten wiser? George was married and has a daughter. They'll say again that I'm a fool, but I feel so good with them. Maybe I'm rushing again, but Laura didn't want to believe that. She and Sarah met often, but in the last month they only talked over the phone. She didn't want to see anyone but him. Laura didn't even know his name, but she really wanted to tell her friend about her budding love for George. She called Sarah, who was delighted, and said she would like to meet and tell her friend a lot of things. They agreed to meet at their favorite cafe from their student days. Entering the cafe, Laura immediately saw Sarah, but she was with a man and a 3-year-old boy. Although almost all the tables were free, Laura understood that Sarah had come with them. She confidently approached them. "Hello," Laura greeted as she approached the table. Smiling, Sarah said, "Meet my most wonderful friend Laura, and this is Anthony, and your future son-in-law Paul." Anthony and Laura looked at each other surprised, then at her, and said in chorus, "Why son-in-law?" Then embarrassed, they fell silent. "In 3 weeks he'll be my son, and I will do everything to make him a worthy husband for your lovely Katie, who I think will soon become your daughter too. Am I right?" Sarah winked mischievously at Laura. "We've already ordered. For starters, pizza; for the main course, also pizza. And for dessert, ice cream." And our wedding will be here in this cafe, quite modest. So call your George right now. We have to introduce our Paul to his bride, Sarah smiled. Tell him that I and Anthony invite him along with Katie. Otherwise, you'll never decide to marry. Tony, your turn to talk. Sarah, it seems you've said everything. Nothing more to add. But I really want to tell Laura that I'm very glad that you finally accepted my proposal. And now we can't change anything, Anthony said. Laura laughed. Didn't Sarah tell you anything about me? Why, she's told me a lot. I've known you for 6 months, though I saw you for the first time today, Sarah laughed. Laura, you'll tell your story after the wedding, to both Tony and George. Now look, our pizza's coming. Laura hadn't noticed how the conversation had shifted to the benefits of homemade food and the harm of eating out, though everyone ate the unhealthy pizza with great appetite. Soon, Laura was discussing internet earnings with Anthony, whom she had just met an hour ago. He was a bit reserved, too serious for his age, but very perceptive. In short, they parted as friends. That evening, Laura called George and found out they were ready to spend his entire vacation at her place. That's wonderful because we've been invited to a wedding, she informed George. A wedding is beautiful, George sighed. Especially when you're the groom, he said with a slight sadness. But Laura decided that he had every right to be sad about the past, since his wife had been a part of his life, and simply couldn't be forgotten, as she was also the mother of his daughter. And Laura needed to accept this and understand his feelings. She counted the days until his arrival, telling her parents nothing yet. But to her grandmother, she said she was eagerly waiting for the guests and would definitely invite her to meet them when they arrived, smiling mysteriously. Her grandmother immediately became concerned about who these guests were, who would spend their entire vacation in Laura's apartment. Just before the guests arrived, Laura suddenly thought that since it was the height of summer and they were used to the water, they would definitely want to swim. She decided to go to the river to see if people were still swimming there, or if the beach higher up the stream had opened as promised last year. When she arrived early in the morning, she didn't recognize the place. There were already many people. They had indeed turned it into a wonderful spot for recreation with sunshades. They had cleared all the bushes and installed a pole for volleyball nets. Laura walked upstream where they had even set up a kiosk, though it was still closed. There were even several changing cabins. Laura walked and rejoiced, because now absolutely nothing reminded her of the past, and she regretted not wearing a swimsuit. Walking ankle-deep in the water along the shore, up to the rise to her house, Laura joyfully took out her phone to call Sarah, but suddenly saw her approaching with her unofficial family. They greeted each other, and they informed her that they swim here every morning before work, when there are very few people, but by evening it's like the ocean. Our neighborhood is upset, said Sarah. And the beach will gradually be extended, Anthony guessed. I also decided that when I went to see what was further along, there was even some machinery there. Good that it will now be so comfortable here. Laura invited them to dinner to celebrate the arrival of the guests and went home, while Sarah and her men went down to the beach. Laura eagerly awaited the guests. She had already stocked the fridge with food, bought several pairs of home slippers, kids, men's, and women's. It was the first time since she lived alone that she would be hosting at her place. She stood on the platform waiting for the train, nervous, but when she saw George come out of the carriage and pick up Katie, since the train was stopping for a short while, she calmed down. And there was Katie, running towards her at full speed, shouting across the platform, "Mom! Mommy! I've arrived home!" After a shower and a hearty dinner, Katie immediately fell asleep in Laura's bed. Laura settled George on the sofa and suggested he go to sleep immediately, as she planned to prepare something in advance for tomorrow's festive lunch with family and close friends, including Grandma, her parents, and Sarah, with her now somewhat official family. Grandma promised to come in the morning to help her, but Laura didn't want to burden her too much. George didn't want to sleep, and they spent another couple of hours in the kitchen. He actively helped Laura and talked about their domestic news and his job, which mainly consisted of business trips that he didn't enjoy. George was looking for a new job, but hadn't been successful yet. Grandma was tired with Katie, and they didn't want to send her to preschool yet, as she was still small. I agree with her, maybe next year, but I understand Grandma Liuba is tired. Laura felt sorry for the kind, always helpful Grandma. I understand, but I can't find work, George suggested, trying to look in our area. Maybe you'll have better luck. In the morning, Grandma quietly knocked on the door. A surprised Laura opened it, saying, "Oh, Grandma, you're so insightful. The guests are still sleeping and I just got up 10 minutes ago." They quickly prepared everything while chatting lightly about new recipes that Grandma collected. Soon, Katie's voice was heard. She screamed, "Mom! Mom! Where are you?" Laura looked at Grandma in fear, forgetting that Katie calls her mom, and Grandma's face showed so much surprise that Laura was afraid something might go wrong. "Katie, I'm here, come over," Katie called back. Then another girl entered, surprised to see a strange grandmother, but clearly said, as Grandma Liuba had taught her, "Good morning." Then Katie ran to Laura, hugged her legs, and calmly began to examine Grandma. "Why didn't you say right away that you were planning this?" Grandma started reproachfully. "Grandma, I'm not planning yet." But then George, already dressed for a walk, entered. He was embarrassed, but introduced himself. Then Laura introduced him to Grandma, and they, with Katie, went to explore the neighborhood. "Remember the address, and by the way, go to the store for some bread," Laura called out to them. "Why didn't you say anything?" Grandma asked with undisguised concern. And she began to tell Grandma everything that happened during her first trip to Uncle Alex's. "Katie didn't want to forget me just like that. I became simply Mom for her." "And how does her father feel about it now?" "Okay now. But he used to be displeased and scold his grandma. But the girl is growing. How will you explain to her why her mom disappears and reappears again? You, as a psychologist, must understand that it creates an unhealthy situation. We don't know yet. Or maybe he doesn't want to know you. Maybe it's convenient for him like this." "No, Grandma, he's a good person. Probably we just need time to get used to each other. He only recently lost his wife." "And are you ready to raise someone else's child?" "But say already, she's mine. I can't imagine what will happen if they suddenly leave somewhere far. And what are they planning?" "No, that's just an example, you know. Sarah also has such a situation, only with her son Paul. Strange, right?" "Yes, with you, there's never a dull moment." "And do Mother and Father know about this?" "No, I haven't wanted to tell them anything yet. I completely forgot that Katie calls me Mom," Grandma laughed. "Foolish girl, that's what I thought you would call me again. And do you love him?" "I don't know. I'm confused and don't know what real love is, but I feel so good since last night." "Well, now I see that you are wise," Grandma said kindly. By the appointed time, the guests had gathered. Sarah and Anthony were slightly late, knowing that the relatives needed to meet each other first. They answered their questions sparingly at the table waiting for Sarah and her future family. Then Laura mentioned that she and George were invited to a wedding. George understood that Laura's parents were completely bewildered by his sudden appearance in their daughter's life and clearly disapproved of the situation. Then, without much thought, he asked her parents for Laura's hand. Her father was pleased by the future son-in-law's immediate response, which resolved the awkward situation. And her mother, looking at her happy daughter, burst into tears and said, "Be happy." Then Sarah arrived with her future family, and the misunderstanding finally dissipated. Katie, approaching Laura and tenderly saying, "Mom, I love you," climbed onto her lap and hugged her. Then Paul, looking at his father and Sarah, said, "I want a mom too." And now Sarah cried as Paul had called her mom for the first time. Suddenly everyone started talking together, comforting the overwhelmed women, hugging the children. Suddenly the oven loudly turned off, where the chicken was roasting. Katie, jumping off Laura's lap, pulled her to the kitchen. "Mom, it's time to take out the chicken, let's go." Laura took out the chicken and left it to cool. She looked at it and thought, "Why didn't I look up on the internet how to carve it?" Suddenly George entered, expertly cut the chicken, and then took the dish to the table where Grandma had just made room. Laura felt as if this had all happened before, and mainly she knew it would always be like this, husband, daughter, and complete harmony around her. She smiled and stood in the doorway, watching everyone with quiet joy. Now no one will say I'm a fool. I just walked very slowly towards my happiness. Soon there was Sarah and Anthony's wedding, modest but very heartfelt. And 2 weeks later, Laura married George. The parents decided that all relatives should be at the wedding, so they tried to organize everything to the highest standard. Laura's wedding was characterized by a large, solemn crowd and a light sentimentality as the parents, arranging their daughter's fate, reminisced about their own wedding, and their life lived in full harmony, now hoping for a grandchild. How could one not be sentimental? But Laura liked everything. She was simply happy and confident that not only she but all her loved ones would find joy, peace, and an unclouded life from this wedding. This belief gave her a positive outlook for the future she had long planned. Max was born exactly 9 months after the wedding. As for the second item, her father took care of it by helping George find a job.